Hi guys, Bomber here. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're gonna do a CCC. This big theme was rework. You needed to design a car which already existed in the game, but actually change it if you thought that the balance was a bit off, probably too strong or too weak, or if you think that the card in its design is not as good as you may have come up with. Instead, the next week's CCC will be woman power. You need to design a character which is a female or something female related. You can leave your submission down below in the description. I will leave the link to the Discord server when you can leave your submission. And with that said, let's jump into reviews. So, at the fourth place, we actually have a tie, and the first one is Bureaucrat from Katsuo Shiko, and it's a Vespitole card from the Power tab. It costs 5 gold, it reads on turn feed, foe loses 1 resource, and also when enemy buys card from bank, 10% chance they spend an additional gold for each gold spent. On play draw a card, like all Vespitole cards, and also has 1 health. So, I gave this card 3 points out of 5 in design and 4 points out of 5 in balance for a final rating of 10 out of 15. And I must say that this week we really had really good submissions, as you see that the last place already starts at 10 out of 15, which is definitely pretty good. So with that said, the reason why for those choices is because for design, I do like the fact that this bureaucrat, the first part is the same as the current bureaucrat, but it has the addition of 10% chance they spend an additional gold for each gold spent. And I like this fact, like the bureaucrat is really checking your incomes and whatever you buy, and actually taxes you a bit on what you buy. So I think it's flavorful and all, and also pretty interesting. But I do disagree with the RNG nature of the effect. Because really it could be like you spend 3 gold and it could activate 3 times in a row. It is pretty unlikely, but it could happen, and so you're actually doubling the cost of a 3 cost gold card, or the same goes for like a 1 gold card. It may be out of 1 on 10 chances that it will double the cost. So really, I don't like this RNG effect, as it is pretty like devastating the less the card costs if the effect activates. Instead, when the card costs a bit more, it's actually pretty not that much impactful, because if you are playing a 10 cost card, then you are pretty much you should get at least 1 proc from this effect, but your opponent is actually paying 10, 11 instead of 10, so it's not that big of a deal. And there are those situations where it activates so much times in a row that the card really costs so much more. So in my opinion, this design is definitely nice, but I would remove the RNG aspect of it. And for example, it could be done like +1 cost for voice card. So like a flat number, every card costs +1 gold. So as I said before, it will be pretty devastating on a really low cost card. Like for example, the 0 cost card are the ones which will like be devastated the most by this type of effect. And still the cards like which cost 10 or more gold, they pretty much don't see that big of a difference. So, like I said, this type of effect will definitely be stronger than the one proposed, and so if that will stick, then probably the bureaucrat cost needs to go up. So, for example, by 1 or 2 to balance the thing that this card definitely puts a lock on your opponent. Instead, for the balance, I went for 4 points out of 5, because really this card is not that strong or weak. It is actually fine. But my problem with it, and actually it's only a little problem, because I only removed 1 point out of 5. The problem here is that the bureaucrat already is not that weak, so definitely this is a straight up buff, because you are adding something to an already good card, so it's actually obviously a buff. And the bureaucrat doesn't need a buff currently, because really, as I said, it is probably not the strongest card ever, but it has its uses. Like for example, for usury combo, you play the usury and then have a bunch of food and remove all the gold from your opponent with the bureaucrat, so they actually didn't gain any advantage, and instead you are getting gold out of the usury, while also removing gold from your opponent each turn. And so it's like you are Actually, with the user, you're not removing gold, but it's like the bureaucrat acts like a bit like a wealthy patron, in the sense that you are spending food to remove the gold and only gain the gold yourself. So it's actually like a wealthy patron in that sense, and probably a bit better. So that synergy still stands, and with this addition, it will be probably be more powerful. Not that powerful like it is OP with this new stuff, but as I said, it doesn't need a buff, in my opinion. So, for the second, fourth place, we have Curry Favor from Rat Elemental. It's a Medri Scar from the Conspiracy tab. It costs 3 gold and it reads on play plus 3 food. And by the way, you should have used the emote, but by the way, and also this turn, feed enemy, activate it as if you controlled it and destroy after use, like all Medri cards. And I gave this card 4 points out of 5 in design and 2 points out of 5 in balance, for a final rating of 10 out of 15. And the reason why for those choices is because really you can skip, it's obviously because I like the design. It's actually a really good take on the Curry Favor effect and the card in itself, but I would indeed like skip the plus 3 food and you can feed the enemy. Instead, I will make it like a card selection card, like for example the Cool the Herd or the Sibling Scroll. Like you play it and it reads you choose 3 enemies, and the second part is the same. This turn activated, actually not this turn, because you are selecting them on the go. So you are playing this and it reads select 3 enemies, activate them as if you controlled it, and you can obviously select the same ally 3 times in a row or 2 or whatever. So like skip the fact that you need to get the food to then feed them. Instead, actually make it an instant card and a selection one. Emo, it's better from the design perspective. You can definitely skip the food part of it. Instead, for the balance, I went for 2 out of 5 because really this card is too weak. Because we had some problem with this card, like can you activate all allies, like for example a warship? Then if yes, I obviously don't think it's too weak, but it actually is too strong. The stronger your opponent's allies are, the best this card is if you can activate all of them with just 1 food, or actually you can activate them 3 times. Because if your opponent has a warship, then probably on the turn you play the Curry Favor, that's a good game, if he has a warship. So obviously your opponent would not go for the warship if he sees that you have a Curry Favor. But you probably could go for it, and then you will restock in, so your opponent only after knows that you have the Curry Favor. Or actually your opponent, as I said, will not go for the warship at all, like for example he does with the Seduce in the first place. But really this card is definitely much stronger compared to Seduce if it goes off with a warship, because after the Seduce your opponent can kill the warship Seduced or whatever. Instead, the Curry Favor, if took by surprise, it's a good game, like literally in an instant. So definitely this is not what the card does. It actually is hidden, but it can only activate on-feed allies. But if is that the case, then looking at the on-feed allies we have, probably the best one you can have with this effect is activating the Inquisitor, because he has the best on-turn, actually on-feed effect of all the allies. Instead, the other ones are probably the Wealthy Patron, or like the Gold Panners, or the Orphan Gang, or the Militias. And if you see at them, they are 1 food for 1 resource, or almost something like that. So if you are considering 1 attack being 1 gold, and 1 gold being 1 gold, obviously, then you're paying 3 gold for the Curry Favor to actually gain 3 attacks or 3 golds on average from the activation of your enemy's allies, and so you are actually going even. Probably the best use you can do for it is actually paying 3 gold to get 3 attacks from the militias and stuff, but then it's actually a worst version of the Waylay, which also actually relies on your opponent allies, because the Waylay does damage every time. Instead, if your opponent doesn't run allies or attacking allies, then the Curry Favor doesn't translate into attacks. But again, probably the best ally you can pick is the Inquisitor, but being good with only if your opponent runs that specific ally definitely doesn't make the card strong. So probably the problem here is that with this current version, you could run multiples of Curry Favor, and then if you run multiples, then the effect actually stacks, so you can double the Curry Favor. So actually every food for you is 2 activations actually, so that's nice. But anyway, you need to restock both of them, or the 3 of them, and pay 7 gold, because the second upgraded one costs 4, obviously. So you have to pay all that much gold for that good effect if it stays like that. Instead, in my opinion, as I said, from the design aspect, I would remove the +3 food and actually make it an instant card and a choose one effect, like 3 times. Then also for the balance, if that happens, we can reduce its cost by 0. And so you're actually gaining some resource for 0 gold, and you gain the most value if your opponent has best and good allies. So like it may be like paid 0 to gain 3 gold, but you have to rely on the fact that your opponent runs economy allies, or like paid 0 gold to get 3 attacks, but you have to rely on the fact that your opponent has an ally which deals attack in the first place. So with that iteration, probably if it is too strong, then also 1 gold may work, but that's the point of it. But by the way, I like the concept of the card. I think that the design could be a bit better with that little twist, and the balance is definitely off in my opinion. It is too weak, but with our cost reduction it will be definitely fine. And then for the 3rd place, we actually have another time a tie, and the first of them is the Shepherd's Gift from DFY Pestilence. It's an idol from the Daramek faction, obviously. It costs 5 gold, and it reads cancel 1 attack per turn, and also on play ahead, 55% chance add a random resource. So I gave this card 3 points out of 5 in design, and 5 points out of 5 in balance, for a final rating of 11 out of 15. And the reason why for those choices, talking about balance first, is because really this card is pretty balanced. I don't see anything wrong with it. If you compare it, for example, to a Shepherd, which is actually obviously the best reference to it, it costs so much less than the Shepherd, and actually gives you half the value of the cancelling 1 attack per turn instead of 2, so definitely that's balanced. But it is counterbalanced by the fact that this idol can't be removed. Without considering the Starfall Requiem, which is actually the first edition, which and also the Banishing Gust, which actually answers those idols, which if not, they can't be removed. So this irremovability is really strong, but it is compensated by the fact that you are getting half the effect for pretty much the same cost. But for the second part instead, still, I think it is still pretty balanced in this iteration, so definitely fine on the balance. But for the design, I would either go to remove the second line all the way, and then to counterbalance this fact, probably also reduce the cost by 1, since you are getting a bit less value for the card, but the cancel 1 attack per turn is definitely the main focus of the card. So I would either keep it more simple and actually make it does only that one thing, which is pretty interesting and very cool, and also remove, as I said, the second line, but then it will probably be too weak. Then, as I said, decrease the cost by 1. Or I would make it more complex, like it is right now, but since I hate RNG, I will make it a consistent effect. But then obviously if it's like on play ahead plus 1 random resource, then it is probably obviously too strong with this iteration. And so if that happens, I will probably increase its cost by 2 or 3. So like if you play like 7 or 8, depending on the +2 or +3 cost increase. If you're playing 7 or 8 airs, you are actually going pretty much even on the value of this card. And also you have gotten the cancel 1 attack per turn, so definitely you went even and ahead of the value you spent. So it's not a pretty a huge cost for the value of the card itself if the second line is a 100% effect. So as I said, either remove the second effect in the first place, so to make the card simpler and pretty nice and simple, as I said, or keep it consistent and making the 100% chance effect, but then probably it is too strong, and so increase the cost by 2 or 3 to counterbalance this fact. And then for the second, third place, we have Poem of Blight from Planck, and it's an incantation from the Endazu faction. It costs 5 gold, and it has 1 charge out of 10, and it reads on all plus 1 charge, and every time foil gains a resource, foil loses that resource, and this card loses 1 charge. So I gave this card 4 points out of 5 in design and 3 points out of 5 in balance for a final rating of 11 out of 15. And the reason why for those choices is, first of all, this card will actually act a bit like the Alting Rebuke. So you hold it and it gains charges, and then when you play it, it stays on the board until you remove all the charges from it. So actually, if your opponent plays actually gains resources, then this card loses charges every time until it goes to 0. And so the main problem that this card would generate, first of all, is that it could lock your opponent out of ever getting resources again. And you may fail to see how this could be done, but it's pretty simple. You just gain a bunch of Gilded Scribes, and you put them on board. Then probably also your opponent is in a moment where he is at 0 resources, and it will not gain that much resource in that turn anyway. So you actually, for example, I'm obviously exaggerating, but it's just to prove the point. You play a 10 out of 10 Poem of Blight with like 2 Gilded Scribes. Then your opponent is at 0 resources, as I said, and he obviously plays coins or actually would have gained some resources from his allies or whatever, but it can't get them because there is obviously the Poem of Blight in play. And so probably the Poem of Blight just cancels 7 resource gain, for example. So it's put at 3, and your opponent did a turn where he couldn't do anything, because obviously he didn't gain any resource and it was already at 0 resource. So it's another time your turn, but the Gilded Scribes charges the Poem of Blight back, and so it's another time at 10. Actually 9, but for the sake of another time at 10 charges. And this is repeats, so your opponent is actually locked out from the game while you can do your own thing. So that's definitely a problem that the user, the Planck, did recognize, and so he said that he would have balanced it out by giving it 5 gold. So it is actually pretty expensive to get, and so this may solve the problem. And in my opinion, that's not the case, because the only thing that the expensive card would acquire is the fact that this scenario will eventually come only a bit later. But it is not impossible that it will not arise at all. And so, for example, and then you may say, but if it comes a bit after, then probably our opponent could have had the time to avoid this type of scenario. Like, for example, not being caught at 0 resources and actually being able to kill the Gilded Scribes in time, because he actually saved the skulls or whatever, and it's true, but it still can happen, and it's really frustrating when that happens. So in my opinion, increasing the cost is not the way to go. Instead, for the design, and by the way, I'm saying all this stuff, and probably you could say that the design would have been much lower if I'm saying all this bad stuff, but all in all, I think that the design is really cool, because I really like the idea of denying the resource gain when the resource is gained, instead of denying them afterwards, like the current Poem of Blight. So the fact that this idea is really good made me go very up on the design aspect, but I did subtract 1 point because of this scenario, which is pretty broken, and not in a way that is too strong, because as I said, it will be pretty unusual and it's pretty hard to pull off, but when pulled out, it's really frustrating to deal with and really unfun to play. Like, for example, the current Undermine plus Coordinate combo, but it is already in the game, but so I want to avoid any scenarios like that. And so for that reason, it is a cool idea, but it is sometimes broken. So in my opinion, a way to solve the design problem is to just get it 4 max charges. And so that will solve the problem, because every time your opponent could just play his full hand, which has a maximum of 4 size in usual, in normal scenarios. So your opponent could sacrifice all his hand to just remove the Poem of Blight. And if multiples are there, that could be solved by just subtracting the charges from one of them until it reaches 0, and then going to another Poem of Blight. So every Poem of Blight is like one turn of income which you are denying. But if your opponent doesn't do that, so if he's not able to at least generate 4 resources in a turn, then you could still do the combo with the Gilded Scribe. Like for example, if your opponent only gains 3 resources, then your Gilded Scribes will recharge it to max, actually denying 3 resources per turn. But your opponent could always go out of this situation. Like for example, if he is at 3 coins in the hand, so he can and doesn't have any other resource gain whatsoever, then he can spend a turn by only playing 2 coins. So he actually still has 1 in hand, and so your Poem of Blight will deny those 2 goals. But then next turn, probably the Poem of Blight is still another time at 4 charges. The next turn you draw 3 cards, so you have 4 coins and you can finally escape from the lock. So it is still a scenario which could occur, very specifically in Matrix, for example, but it is solvable with this like pocketing the coins and only playing the 4 coins in usual scenarios. So for the design, instead for the balance, if that design change happens, because as I said, it is pretty broken if not, then if that design change happens, then the balance is 3 because it is too weak. If the design change happens, because it is too weak, because if not used to lock specifically out your opponent with the combo that I said, then you are just spending 5 gold to just deny some resources, and it also takes a while to do so. So if you are actually considering your opponent resource worth as one of your goal, then you have to wait 4 turns for it to pay itself out, and it's probably not in the same way. It is not probably the same value, and it's true that you could charge it up, but really it's not that valuable to charge this Poem of Blight up. So I think that if the design change happens, then probably the cost should be reduced by 3, but it is probably too much. Also, probably 3 cost will be fine still, but definitely not 5. I think it's too high. But probably 2 or 3 is balanced, in my opinion, if the design change happens another time. And then for the second place, we actually have another time Curry Favor, but this time is from a different user, which is Actual Evolved Milk. And it's another time a Madrid card from the Conspiracy tab. This time it costs 0 gold and it reads, for each enemy +1 random resource, excluding magic, and destroy after use. So I gave this card 4 points out of 5 in design and 4 points out of 5 in balance for a final rating of 12 out of 15. And the reason why for those choices, talking about design, is because I really think it's a cool idea. I like the fact that you are curry favoring with your opponents and actually asking them to do you a favor, like the card suggests. And that favor is represented by you getting random resources, and excluding magic because the user thought that it was too strong if it could also give you magic, and I could see that happen. But I do feel like the random resource in the first place is not as so much Matrix thing. I do see random resources in Daramek, for example, and like Matrix, I don't like it being able to generate random resources. It doesn't feel like a Matrix thing. So in that it could be easily solved by just giving you +1 gold for each enemy, +1 gold, or +1 food, or +1 skull. Whatever the user think is more appropriate for a curry favor, but really +1 random resource is not that appropriate for Matrix, so I would either go for it like a more economy stuff, like +1 gold for each enemy, so it's an economy card in that sense, or +1 skull, and so it's a pretty aggressive card, but not that much since you need to be behind. So your opponent has to have allies, so this card becomes pretty aggressive. But it's probably not that much aggressive as obviously your opponent has allies and probably also interceptors, and so you're actually only using the curry favor like mayhem if all those allies have 1 health, if it gives you +1 skull. So it is either a choice between +1 gold or +1 skull. Instead for the balance, if this design change happens, or even if it doesn't, still it's okay, but you need to be behind, like I said, and it's useless if your opponent has no ally decks. So I do see it more like an economy card, so I would like more the +1 gold change. So you can actually build your own stuff even if you are behind. The curry favor could pretty much be good at it. And so I like this fact, but again, it's okay, but not too strong or too weak, but still it's okay. But I will definitely change the design problem I said before. And then for the second place, we have Summoning Rift from Rat Elemental. It's an incantation from the Endazu faction. It costs 4 gold and it has 0 out of 3 charges. And it reads on hold +1 charge, and on play for each charge summon something. It also has a flavor text which reads, beyond the veil are many other words, words filled with strange and terrible things. When lifting it to glimpse the beyond, one never knows what they might see or what might look back. So definitely a pretty interesting flavor text. It is probably a reference to the quote, when you look into the abyss look into you, something like that. So probably the reference is from that. But anyway, I get this card 4 points out of 5 in design and 5 points out of 5 in balance for a final rating of 13 out of 15. And the reason why for those choices is because really I also, by the way, I'm going to show you the list of summons this card summons, because the summon something, there is a list of the summons. So this is the list of the summons. I will not go over all of them, but let me just say that I do believe that all the outcomes are really balanced out, and even if you get multiples of them, actually probably you can't get multiples of them. I do believe, and I probably hope, that you gain different, like for example, if you summon the Planar Brute, and then you also summon another one, it can't be another time a Planar Brute, and it summons another thing with the same Summoning Rift. In my opinion, I do like this idea, and also this is the problem with the design that I will talk about in a bit. But I do believe that it will summon different allies if you already summoned one of the 5. So for the design, as I said, the only problem I want to share, because I really like the idea of a Summoning Rift actually summoning something, and also I do like the design of all the summons, so that's really on point, I really like that. But probably the only thing that I will change, which is just a little bit off, is the fact that I will give the actual Summoning Rift 5 max charges. Because then if you charge it to max, then it can summon all 5 of the summons. It really makes sense, and it's just a matter of aesthetics and symmetry or whatever. So I do think that the design is a bit off in that sense, because it misses the aesthetics of being able to summon all 5 of the summons, since probably the max charge for as you see on the allies, 5 is the max health, so it is currently has some meaning behind this 5. It is probably the max of things. It probably is not, because incantation has 20 or whatever, but really 5 is really a powerful number in War of Omens, as is the max health points for allies and stuff. So really, it is, in my opinion, if the max charges were 5, and so you could be able to summon all 5 of them and different of them. Also 5 is that really good number in War of Omens, so it will really come out pretty all together if that change happens. And so for this problem in the aesthetics of the card and all, I did remove 1 point, but it's only 1 point in the design. But still, really cool concept, I really do like that. And then, for the first place, is Ibshuk from Antonio R39, and it's a Goetia card from the Endazu faction. It costs 4 gold, and it has 1 charge out of 3, and it reads feed 3 health points to gain +1 charge. It has 1 health point for a charge it has, and it reads also on turn, attack weakest, and heal hero for charges this card has. Also, when attacked, +1 magic. So, I gave this card 5 points out of 5 in design and 4 points out of 5 in balance for a final rating of 14 out of 15. And the reason why for those choices is because really for design, I really think that this iteration of Ibshuk is much more interesting than the one we currently have in the game. It much more represents both the fact that this card is really strong with the hero it comes with, because it has the heal hero synergy like the Zalazir already has. It has obviously the fact that it is a Goetia, so you can spend L points, and Zalazir is obviously better at the spending L points than other heroes. And he also still has the feel of an Ibshuk, which gives you magic when attacked. So this interaction is the same, but it has the heal hero also, which is probably much better than it is currently and now. It is probably worse to use it like the current Ibshuk is used, so a way to counter retaliates or direct attacks from allies to actually get magic out of it. So like a counter, like the current lepers in the Dharmak, Ibshuk is used probably for the same reason right now. But with this iteration, it could be used as a way to have a consistent output of attacks and also a healing power, which is threatening in Zalazir probably more the healing instead of the attack. And if you want to remove both the attack and the healing, you gain 3 magic if it is fully charged. And so it probably acts a bit like Erdov Boars, if you think about it. It is a constant output of 1 attack per turn, and also has this more threatening thing of healing your hero. And also it gives you resources if it is killed. The Erdov Boars actually gives you only 2, and they are not probably both magic, which obviously are more valuable than the other resources. So as the comparison stands, the Erdov Boars is probably weaker than this one, but you have to remember that you have to pay 6 L points to play the Ibshuk, and also it is in a different faction. And Dazu has not the same draw power, and so it has to have strong allies, and this one is one of them. So definitely for the design, as I said, I'm pretty definitely okay with it. For the balance, instead, I do feel like probably it is still not too strong, because as I said, Endazu really needs strong allies because they are really weak to removal and they can't redraw them and stuff. So it is not as powerful as in Dharmak compared to the Erdov Boars another time. So I will probably reduce the cost by 1, but it's just a little thing. Or probably another solution that I like better is to actually give it more board presence, so your opponent actually wants to remove this card more consistently, and so actually giving it 2 attacks per turn, attack weakest, and +1 cost. Also, another thing that will solve the problem is also probably in the -1 cost iteration is also giving it ignore intercept. So it actually kills the weakest thing, and also siphon is life, and this is represented by healing your hero by the charge it has. And so that's what I think about this iteration of Ibshuk. Really well done. So that's it for this video. Remember to leave down below in the description, I will leave the link to the Discord server where you can leave your submission for this week team, CCC, and the team, as I said, is Woman Power. So that's it for this video. Hope you liked it and find it useful. Be sure to leave down below a comment to let me know what you want to see in the next videos, and as always, see ya!